On this week's episode of the Nerf Report, Nintendo tries to dig their way out from their roller coaster of a Switch 2 reveal week. Bungie shows off Marathon, their brand new extraction first-person shooter. We talk about this week's game of the week, South of Midnight. All of this and a whole bunch of nonsense on this week's episode of the Nerf Report.
Are you listening?
Strangers from distant lands and friends of old, we have been summoned for another episode of the Nerf Report. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are on the road this week, away from our studio. We are coming to you from Louisville, Kentucky, the bourbon capital of the United States. Kentucky Derby, also a place that is very underwater. They got a bunch of rain here. The storms are crazy. Literally, the tornado they hit here a couple weeks ago, right down the road, it has been kind of wild to see just the destruction that Mother Nature can have. But anyway, we are here. We are in the hotel. We are filming this for you. So if you're watching this and you're like, man, what happened to your studio? Don't worry. Next week, we will be back in the studio. The background will look better. There won't be so many shadows. And who knows? There might be some surprises for next week's show. You leave them wanting more. Shout out to those of you that are listening to our show over on Apple and Spotify podcasts right now. That's right, the Nerf Report is now available for audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. Big thank you to all of you who check out the shows on those forums, listen to them there, follow the channels. It means a lot to me to know that not only people on YouTube and on TikTok like our show and like the content that we're trying to create, but there's also people in the audio space who are like, this isn't that bad. I like listening to this show while I'm playing some video game. That means a lot to me, so thank you so much. Obviously, this has been a big week of travel for me, coming to you from Kentucky, but it's been a big week for gaming. We obviously are going to be diving into Nintendo, kind of in disaster recovery mode from their Switch 2 reveal week. Bungie broke the internet by debuting a brand new video game. We're going to be talking about South of Midnight, a game that I think looks super cool, and I can't wait to dive into, but also a bunch of games released this week. So let's go ahead and pull these up. So nothing released on Monday, but on Tuesday, April 8th, we had a couple games released. First up, South of Midnight, our game of the week. This game is incredible. If you've not seen it yet, please stick to the part of the show where we start talking about this, because this game is awesome. It's available on Xbox Game Pass. Do not sleep on this. Then another game came out called Ixion, and then that moves us to Wednesday, April 9th, when Commando's Origin launched. And then on Thursday, April 10th, the Talos Principle Reawaken launch. We got Star Overdrive, Promise Mascot Agency, Monster Energy Supercross 25, and then a game that has been taking a lot of the video game influencers by storm, Blueprints. I did not expect for this game to be as popular as it is, but everyone who's playing it is saying that this is a indie game of the year contender. The folks over at Balatro, who had one of the top game of the years from last year, they're like, this game's great, don't sleep on it, it's definitely worth checking out. But then, of course, Friday, nothing released, but that led us to Saturday, where we saw the first footage of Marathon, and my God, that game looks great. But hey, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're going to be diving into our game of the week of a little bit, talking about South of Midnight. But before we do that, there is one game that I feel like we should be talking about, right? So I'm scrolling through X this week, and I'm going through kind of seeing the different posts. And there's this trend that's like, how do people describe your video game? And I saw this one that caught my eyes. This game is called Tenet the Spark, and we're going to pull up the gameplay footage available right now. So Tenet the Spark is an action-adventure game. So think games like God of War or Spider-Man. But what's cool about this is while you're playing, you switch between 3 different timelines. Essentially, according to the developer, you're going to be playing as a boxer who's fighting rival gangs. But as you progress through the story and as you're fighting, you switch between like the modern era, so like right now, but then you can go into Viking times and then you can go into Aztec times. This game looks so cool. And based off this trailer, I am totally sold on what we're seeing here, because look, this looks like God of War. It looks like Spider-Man, but it's giving you the ability to switch through the eras and get a little bit of all of it. I think this is going to be really cool. Now, unfortunately, this game is very early on, it seems. There's no release date. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't have a release date for Tenet the Spark. So we got to talk about a game that came out this week, and it is time for our game of the week. But before we do that, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's say special thank you to those of you who make this show possible. Special shout out to the Nerf Gaming News Plus members. And if you're like, what are those? How can I help the show? Hey, watch this video. Did you know that on average, 12 video game podcasts die every single week? Now, is that a real stat? I don't know. I do this show by myself. We can't hire researchers, but with your support, we can avoid becoming another statistic and keep on making really cool content like this show, along with other cool shows in the future. That's right. By becoming a Nerf Gaming News Plus member, you not only help support independent games media, but you help us create really cool gaming content. Because with your support, we're able to hire things like researchers, writers, editors, along with other people who can ensure that we are constantly coming out with the best content possible for you. Ah, look at that. Another gaming podcast just bit the dust. I guess we should make it 13. This week's game of the week is South of Midnight. Yeah, this is a game that I have been very intrigued by ever since I saw it during like the Xbox Developer Direct. Remember that event? They showed off like 4 games and they're like, hey, this is what's coming out this year. Obviously, everybody's like oohing and on over like the new Doom game. Same, can't wait for that. But then we saw South of Midnight and I'm like, oh, this game, I think it looks great. And fun fact, this game is done by the studio who made We Happy Few, which if you haven't played that is another gem. Yeah, South of Midnight launched this week. The game looks super unique. The graphics are beautiful, and the gameplay seems like it's an action-adventure platformer, which is right up my alley. But before we start diving into what makes this game super unique, let's dive into the reviews and see what everyone is saying about this. Let's go ahead and pull up the Metacritic score. Right now, South of Midnight is on Metacritic with a 77, which isn't bad. I saw somebody in the comments the other day being like, are we now saying that like 70s is a bad score? No, I'm not saying 70s is a bad score. Obviously not a 10 out of 10, but a 70 is still good. As a guy who got through high school with C's, I am not going to be one to say, oh, you shouldn't get 70s. No, 70s mean it's a good game. If it's a 40, if it's a 30, if it's a 20, then we start talking about bad video games. But anyway, let's dive into some of the specific reviews real quick. Let's get the roundup. IGN gave South of Midnight an 8 out of 10. GameSpot gave the game an 8 out of 10. Games Radar gave it a 3.5 out of 5. VGC gave the game a 3 out of 5. Eurogamer gave the game a 3 out of 5. And then GamesHub, check out that. GamesHub gave South of Midnight a 10 out of 10. They really like that video. And look, I think South of Midnight looks cool. It might not be your cup of tea, but I do kind of want to touch on some things that I think are super intriguing about this. If you haven't heard about it, South of Midnight is about like a hurricane that comes through and it rips through the main character Hazel's hometown. And following that, they're sent on a journey to rescue their mother. And along the way, they encounter like these mythical creatures, southern folklore, and of course, magical moments. And of course, I say magic. Hazel has magic powers in the game, and that's how they kind of like fight off creatures along with like unlocking key story parts of this game. The other thing that I think is super dope about this is the animation, right? The game, super unique. When I see the trailer and I see the gameplay footage for South of Midnight, I have a really hard time finding or thinking of another game that looks kind of like this stop motion claymation effects that we're getting here. Claymation is such a lost art form when it comes to like the world of cinema and television. I think it's super cool that it's being used in the form of video games. So shout out there. Plus, the game's beautiful, right? This is an Xbox action adventure game, and I think it might be one of the most beautiful games from Xbox this year, and definitely deserves some kudos there. The other thing that I think deserves some praise about this game, 12 hours long. Right? I know there's going to be people out there who hear that and they're like, man, that's not long enough. Assassin's Creed was 200 hours. As a dad, as a gamer who also has tiny kids, I miss the games that I can knock out in 2 days or 3 days. Like, remember when you could play a video game and you get the credits like within a couple hours? Star Fox 64, you could play it in like 3 hours and beat the game, and you're like, I feel accomplished. And the other thing that's drawing me towards South of Midnight is it's available on Xbox Game Pass. So if you're subscribed to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, you have access to South of Midnight right now. And based off the reviews, I think that this is going to be a safe bet for most gamers, and it's definitely worth checking out. So shout out to the team behind South of Midnight. Congratulations, you are this week's Game of the Week. South of Midnight is available right now for Xbox, PC, and Game Pass subscribers. Now, moving on from South of Midnight, we need to talk about Nintendo because last week was rough. Nintendo had a very rough week, and moving into this week, they've kind of been in full disaster control because Nintendo had a roller coaster of a week with the intro of the Switch 2. However, their second week is proving to be even more interesting because at the end of the day, the dust is settling, right? Nintendo spent all of last week introducing the new games, introducing the hardware, introducing the console, all the new Joy-Con features, and the internet had its chance to push back and say, yeah, don't like that. Or they started saying like, oh, why are you charging us so much money for this? Or the C button, blah, 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 blah. And so the second week has been interesting because Nintendo has finally had an opportunity to address some of the controversies and the criticisms coming from the internet gaming community. And look, some of Nintendo's responses are good. The other ones, well, let's just say Nintendo probably needs a little bit of work. For example, Nintendo of America's Doug Bowser, he's the president of Nintendo America, he was asked, what do you respond to gamers when it comes to them saying that the Nintendo Switch 2 is too expensive and you've priced out your player base? And Doug Bowser basically said, like, yeah, the Switch 2 price point is what it is. It is high. And if you can't afford it, well, we have a thing called the Switch 1, which I kind of get what he's trying to say, but at the same time, not the best look, right? It's the Nintendo's let them eat cake moment. And I don't want someone in the comment section to be like, you're lying. He never said that. So let's pull up the full quote. I've got it right here. Doug Bowser said, we recognize there are some people that may not be able to afford the Switch 2's price point. That's why we wanted to make the other Switch platforms available. So people still have an opportunity to come into our gaming universe, be a part of these characters in these worlds, and see value, if you will, in whatever rung of the platform they come in. But look, $450 consoles and $80 video games, that is just the world that we now live in. And I think that needs to be very clear. We as gamers need to understand the passion that we have, the hobbies that we enjoy. They're going to get more expensive over time, just with inflation and other various things. But to the crowd who's protesting, saying, drop the price, instead of Nintendo coming out and saying, yes, the console's expensive. We understand that some gamers are upset, and taking that as an opportunity to justify, like, the hardware, of saying the reason it's so expensive is the hard drive, it's the screen, it's the brand new C button, whatever Nintendo wanted to spend it. That would have been so much better than Nintendo been like, let me wipe your poor tears away with the original Nintendo Switch console. But then the other bit of controversy that I really enjoyed was the Nintendo Switch C button, right? We talked about it last week. A lot of people were wondering what the C button was going to be. Nintendo was like, hey, the C button is essentially just for chat. Well, it turned out that if you're not subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online, then the C button does virtually nothing for the console. So the C button is actually hidden behind a paywall, if you will. Yeah, that's right. The brand new C button that opens up the Nintendo Switch 2 console's game chat will require players to have a subscription to Nintendo Switch Online, which I heard it from plenty of you in the comment section, right? The Nintendo faithful came to me and they said, shut your mouth, fat boy. Stop talking about video games and stop tearing down my favorite platform. It's $20 a year. You don't have $20 to pay for Nintendo Switch Online? No. I am a struggling YouTuber, all right? I make $130 off YouTube every single month. So, yeah, $20 is a little bit of reach. Now, Nintendo, if you want to give me Nintendo Switch Online, I'll gladly take that. But anyway, I will say, what's interesting about this is Nintendo, again, isn't being very upfront when it comes to the C button. And they're kind of being a little shady because GameSpot was like, hey, what's going to happen if I don't subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online and I press the C button? And Nintendo basically said, like, we can't go into details. What we can tell you is nothing bad will happen, but we can't tell you what would happen. And that causes the internet to just lose their collective mind, because immediately people start panicking and they're like, nothing bad's gonna happen, but what happens if there's an error? What if I'm playing and I accidentally press the C button? Am I gonna get a bloop bloop? A little pop-up comes up on the screen and it's like, sorry, your game chat's in another console. Please subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online. That would be frustrating during the middle of a game. The other big controversy for Nintendo was the pricing. A lot of people were kind of upset about the $80, $90 price tags, and there were people in the comment section who were like, they're not going to be $90. The pricing's wrong. I looked it up again. It's $80 to $90. But again, Nintendo's Doug Bowser, I got to give him credit. This is one of them where he came out and he's like, hey, it's a variable price, which it's interesting. But he essentially said that when the game's warranted, they'll be $80 to $90. But that doesn't mean that every single indie darling on the Nintendo console is going to be $80. We'll still have $20 games, we'll still have $30 games, we'll still have $40 games, we'll probably still have $59, $99 games. But when it comes to the games that Nintendo feels are worth it, that's where we are going to get the $80 to the $90. It's going to be a variable pricing system. In fact, Doug Bowser said that like the new pricing is not a benchmark. This isn't going to be the standards. It's variable, and it's going to be case by case, which kind of brings us to the cartridge controversy. Right? It kind of goes hand in hand. The cost of physical games being more expensive. A lot of people are upset by that, but that's not the cartridge part that I want to talk about, right? The cartridge, everyone's upset about the fact about the physical media. They're all upset about there not being actual games on the cartridge, but for me, that's not what I'm upset. I want to know something that Nintendo has been dodging the question for a week. What do the Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges taste like? That's right. You might remember Switch 1 cartridges, right? They've got a little film on it to make it taste bad so you don't swallow the cartridges, right? A toddler comes along, they're like, look at this piece of plastic, put it in your mouth. Ugh, it tastes terrible. What about the Switch 2? What are they going to taste like? Nintendo confirmed with GameSpot that the Switch 2 cartridges will indeed have the same bitter taste to discourage eating of the Switch 2 cartridges. It just amazes me that that's something we have to talk about. Now, the taste of Switch 2 cartridges behind us. I do have to apologize to some of the physical game collectors out there. Y'all got into the comment sections on TikTok and on YouTube Shorts, and you came after me, and you made it very clear that I was wrong about this. So I owe you all an apology, because I said that Nintendo Switch 2 cartridges moving forward will not have games on them. Nintendo did come out, and they basically said some games will be on the cartridges, but other games will be game keys, right? So big games, so like Final Fantasy VII, the remake, Hogwarts Legacy. There is no way in hell that those games are going to fit on those cartridges. So with those, you'll have a game key. You'll type in a code, it'll download the game. Physical media makes no sense in that application. But for others, like when it comes to like Mario Kart World or Donkey Kong Bonanza, the game will be on those cartridges. So I'm kind of wrong. But as a voice on the internet, as someone that's on TikTok, I will take the responsibility to admit that I was partially wrong. So forgive me, TikTok comment section. And the other bit of controversy that Nintendo had to address this week was about the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour, which, based off our comment section alone, I think this is probably the biggest story going into the Switch 2. So in case you missed it, it is a entry-level game for the Switch 2 that basically shows you how to get the best possible functionality out of your Switch 2. It teaches you things like the magnets and the buttons and the controls and like little hidden secrets about the console. And then Nintendo dropped a bomb on all of us by saying, oh yeah, you gotta pay to play this game. And Nintendo was like, hey, don't worry about paying. It's not gonna be a $80 game. It's not gonna be a $90 game. It's gonna be a $10 game. Right? Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour will be $10, to which I would like to take the opportunity to say that is $10 too expensive. This should be a free game. This should be included with the Switch 2, just like you get Astrobots with the PlayStation 4, just like the MetaQuest headsets give you free video games, just like the Wii gave you Wii Sports. This should be a free game for the console. But anyway, we're going to be covering this story a whole lot more here on the show. So if you want more Nintendo news, until we find out about pre-orders here in the States and release dates and pricing, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell so you can get all of the Nintendo news as it develops here on this channel. Now, moving on from Nintendo, we are going into the world of Bungie, because we got our first look at Marathon, their first new game since releasing Destiny, and we have all the details surrounding gameplay, release date, and the upcoming alpha test that you can access very soon. Bungie. This week got very exciting because we were going into the show and I was like, man, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. But then Bungie came out and they're like, we're going to show off Marathon. And I don't know how you cannot be excited, right? Bungie is one of those developers that is just in a class of their own. I don't know if there is another developer like Bungie that has just such a record of games that they released. Like, obviously, you got Halo, then you got Destiny. Those are some of the most popular video games in the history of gaming. And I get Destiny 2 was not everyone's cup of tea, but Destiny 1, man, that was peak gaming. Hanging around the Cosmodrome, knocking out public events with the boys, Prison of Elders, getting the Gallahorn and blowing up the enemies, the Loot Cave, Destiny 1 and Bungie, some of the greatest memories that I have in the world of gaming. Now Bungie introduced us to Marathon this week, and like I said, it's going to be Bungie's next big game. And while the gameplay and the graphics definitely look like Destiny 3, it is very, very far from being a Destiny video game. You see, Destiny is a first-person shooter video game, whereas this one is a first-person shooter video game. However, I think it classifies as a sci-fi extraction shooter game, where essentially you will be playing as a runner. You are a cybernetic mercenary, and your goal is to team up in groups of 3 to scour for remains of a lost colony while battling rival runner teams and hostile security forces. And what's cool is, like, to add a level of permanence to this is before every single round, you put your gear together, you get all your loot, and then you go in to be like as souped up as possible. But the issue is if you die and your loot gets left in the map, it's gone. And I love that level of permanence in a video game, specifically a Bungie game. I think that sounds so fun. And I, for one, cannot wait to get my hands on this game. Now, as far as release dates go, Marathon will be releasing on September 23rd of 2025, which happens to be my wife's birthday, which means I will not be playing this game at launch, but it will be launching for Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox with full crossplay and cross-save support. But anyway, that's it for this week's show. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me this week. It is my pleasure, as always, to talk about the gaming news with you each and every weekend. Thank you for spending the time with me, listening to my thoughts on gaming, and thank you for sharing your thoughts in the comment section. As always, my name is Bryant. This has been the Nerf Report, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.